Hi, and good afternoon to everybody, and welcome. Lovely to have you present in our company for the first of a beautiful series of wonderful classes, hopefully, that you'll be able to join with and enjoy. And of course, headed as acquiring tools for life. The subject matter being Pirkei Avos, usually translated as ethics of our fathers. But if we take a look at the word perek means a chapter. Pirkei, the plural, chapters. Avot, yes, correctly usually translated as fathers. But in fact, if we think about it, excuse me, just trying to get my screen straight there. In fact, if we think about it, the idea in Torah of an av, a father, is not just the concept of a father in the usual sense, as in a parent, but in fact, an av is a principle, a major axiom. And if we then think about Pirkei Avot in a slightly different fashion, we're actually talking about Pirkei, chapters of Avot, of major axioms, of major principles by which we are supposed to live our lives. I think I'm correct in saying that if you were to ask the average individual of what is the most important thing in life, in other words, what would you like, or what would anybody like, I guess, for people to say, God forbid, in a eulogy about you? What would you like them to say? Would you like them to say that you were a brilliant businessman or woman? Would you like them to say that you did a fantastic job of being the best that you were or that you are in your industry? I think that the majority of us strive more than anything else to try to be a mensch, to try to be a mensch, to try to be a decent human being, to behave correctly, to do things right, to do things properly. And if we think about Pirkei Avot, major axioms of life, it is far more about, and in fact, every one of them is about how to live our lives as mentioned, how to be menschlich, how to be decent, how to be decent human beings. Within the chapters of the fathers, or within these Pirkei Avot, there aren't the usual instructions like different tractates of Torah. In fact, there are 60 tractates, 60 masechtas, 60 tractates of Talmud. This is one of them. The majority of them, in fact, all the other 59, have specific laws, things that are mitzvot, things that we are obligated to do by Torah. This one is very much the exception. Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, or this particular tractate of major principles, of major axioms, is not about particular mitzvahs that we must do. Nowhere in Pirkei Avot are you going to find the instructions about how to keep Shabbat, how to keep kosher, how to give charity, how to give tzedakah. Here in Pirkei Avot are tried and tested principles of how we are to and how we should live our lives, how we should practice the very ethics of being a mensch, of being a decent human being, of being the kind of person that people are going to be able to say that was and that is a mensch, that is a decent human being. That's really what we are going to be thinking about and studying. That is what Pirkei Avot is truly all about. It's an amazing masechta. It's an amazing tractate. It has within it 6 different chapters. As we know, these chapters are all written up in the Siddur. It is the only tractate of Talmud that appears in its entirety in our Siddur, in our daily prayer book. And in fact, if you would like to make this a better study of Torah in the real sense of the word, I'd like to invite you to take a look in your Siddur, in a Siddur that you have handy at home, and follow along in that Siddur. A Siddur, hopefully, that has a translation, and we can compare notes on the various different translations if that is something that comes up and something that is deemed to be necessary. But take a look in your Siddur, and if you have, I have in front of me 2 Siddurim, so I can give you a couple of page numbers if you have a Siddur handy. If you look on page 544 in the Art Scroll Siddur, you'll find Pirkei Avos. And if you're looking in the new Chabad Siddur on page 271, that's where you'll find Pirkei Avos. That's where you'll find this whole wonderful, rich, and all-encompassing kind of tractate on how to be a mensch. So have a look. Look there, page 544 in the Art Scroll, page 271 in the Chabad Siddur, and have a look at what it says about this amazing tractate. So first of all, we're told right at the top of both of those Siddurim that these chapters are predominantly studied in shuls around the world from Pesach time through to Shavuot. And yes, there are usually 6 weeks between Pesach, 7 weeks actually between Pesach and Shavuot, but there'll be 6 Shabboses on which we can study the ethics of our fathers, and that's the most common one. And then, of course, there are many communities, as it will point out in your Siddur, that will study this all the way through to Rosh Hashanah. But in fact, that's the custom that was instituted perhaps in the months in which Shabbat was a little bit longer in the Northern Hemisphere. And therefore, there's a little bit more time like we have now. On Shabbos afternoon, there is, thank God, so much time that we can spend a tremendous amount of time doing all sorts of stuff on Shabbos, including a Shabbos shlof, and perhaps studying stuff that we would otherwise not get to study. That's what we could do now in these days. But it became the custom in the Northern Hemisphere, and of course, it's something that we keep to as well, that in the so-called summer months, when Shabbos is a little bit longer, there's more time, and we can delve into other things, not just our Shabbos davening, not just our regular shiurim of Shabbos, but in fact, we can go a little bit beyond that, and we can learn and we can look at the tractate called Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of Our Fathers. And so it's printed in every Siddur, and every Siddur will tell you that it's predominantly studied in these Northern Hemisphere summer months, in ours more around wintertime. But amazingly, it starts off by telling us something or quoting a Mishnah that actually doesn't appear in this tractate at all. It's quite a weird thing. We're getting into the study of the ethics of our fathers, of Pirkei Avos, and right away we're quoting actually a Mishnah that comes from the Talmud Sanhedrin. Have a look at it. You'll see it right there on the top of page 544 and the top of page 271, depending on the Siddur that you are using. And if you're not using a Siddur, I will read it out aloud and translate it. It says, and quoting here, a tractate, a Mishnah from a tractate called Sanhedrin, it says, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. Now it tells us that this should be studied before we actually get into a chapter of Pirkei Avos, and it is the tradition, it is the custom to say or to study this Mishnah before you actually get into the study of Pirkei Avos. And so we're going to do that here as well. We take a look at this Mishnah, and it says, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. What does it mean? All Israel, Kol Yisrael, yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. They all have a chelek, a portion, a part Le'olam haba, in the world to come. Shenemar, as it says, Va'amech kulam tzadikim. Va'amech kulam tzadikim. And your people are all righteous. Le'olam yirshu aretz. They will inherit the land forever. Neitzer matai. They are the branch of my planting. Ma'aseh yadai lehitpa'er. They are the work of my hands in which to take pride. It's very, very strange. It's very peculiar. Number one, we want to get into major principles of how to be a mensch, and we're putting this type of preamble, this preface to the entire study of Pirkei Avos by making the following statement, a statement taken from another tractate, Sanhedrin. And it tells us the whole Jewish people, Kol Yisrael, every single Yisrael, every single Jew, Yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. They all have a portion in the world to come. What could possibly be the meaning and the reason why we make that statement before we study Pirkei Avos? What is the link? What is the connection? What are we actually talking about? You know, one of the things that has challenged sages from time immemorial has been the actual order in which we should study various things in various parts of Torah. I remember as a young student going for the very first time to yeshiva, one of the Rosh Yeshivas called me over on the first day, and you're a little bit nervous as you are in any new school. And he said to me, we're studying Talmud. He said to me, take a look at this page of Talmud. And can you read for me? I was a little nervous, as you may be on your first day in anything else. And here, particularly in yeshiva, sitting in front of this awesome man in a study hall that I wasn't that used to, and being called upon to read something from the Talmud that I didn't feel that I was proficient in at all. And he says, read. So you start, a page of Talmud is set up in an interesting fashion. For those of you who know, you start kind of a third of the way down the page in the middle column. That's where you start reading from the first Mishnah. And there, so like a good student and a diligent person, and obviously part of wanting to show that I really knew what I was talking about, that's where I began. That's where we started. And he said to me, now, 1 second, why didn't you start at the top of the page? Oh, come on. Everybody knows that. You don't start at the top of the page, because on the top of the page, you usually have the title, the chapter heading, and then you have some of the commentaries like Rashi and Tosfos and so on the various sides of the Talmud. They sometimes overlap over the top of the page. It's not the right place to start. Everybody knows that you start with the Mishnah, which appears in the middle of the page. Why start over there? So I tried to show my prowess and my knowledge by telling him, no, we don't start there, we start. And he said, no, there is something important. And he said, take a look at the very top of the page. What's the very first thing that appears right at the top of the first page of every Talmud? Every tractate. Now, except this one, I guess. Pirkei Avos is always written in a siddur in this format, but every page and every tractate of Talmud, as it's written in the Gemara itself, the first thing on top of the page is the letter bet, the letter bet, bet. Number 2, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And he said to me, why don't you start there? So I said, because, nobody reads a book by saying, well, let's first announce page 1. Now we go to what's on the page. We don't do that. We start with the teichen. We start with the stuff that's involved, the stuff that's really there, the stuff that's really involved. Why are we starting with the page number? It seems peculiar. And he said to me, no, there is something very important about every page of Talmud and every page of every tractate of Talmud. And that is that the Talmud always starts on page 2. You know that? You go through every tractate of Talmud, there's no page 1. There are a whole lot of things about where the books were printed and who put this together and what it contains, etc., etc., etc. But page 1 in the Talmud actually doesn't exist. We always start on what we call daf bet, daf beit, daf base, the second page. He said, why? So I said, I don't know why. And he said, the reason is because before we can actually get to start learning Talmud, we've got to know all the verses from the Chumash, from the Torah, upon which this tractate is based. We have to have some kind of a pre-knowledge. We've got to know what we are actually talking about in terms of the written law, the Torah law, and only then can we actually transfer and translate and go to the Talmud itself, which is a much higher level of understanding, much deeper level of understanding. So he taught me an incredible lesson. And that's that sometimes the preface is of great, great value, and even to the point of the page number on which Talmud is printed is of significance. It is of great and huge significance, and we need to make sure that we know exactly what we're talking about before we actually get to this particular piece of learning that we're actually studying. We need to know the verses upon which it's based. Now, in a way, we are being told exactly the same thing here. Our sages found fit to tell us that you know what you're going to get involved in Pirkei Avos? You're going to be talking about the ideas and ideals of how to live your life well, of how to be a mensch, of how to be a decent human being, of how to have ethics and how to have a moral kind of a life. This is not going to be dealing with down to earth, simple or sometimes not so simple laws of you must do this or you must not do that. A lot of what we're going to see here are values that are optional. And we're being told that that is something so significant that it takes us to a realm and a level that is way beyond what our mundane, down-to-earth, legal kind of approach is actually going to lead us to. You can study Torah for your whole life and learn all of the laws and be a legal, law-abiding citizen in every sense of the word. You're keeping Shabbos and you're keeping kosher and you're giving tzedakah as it should be and you're doing all of those wonderful things. But there is something higher than that. And there is something more important than all of that. And there is something more significant than that, and that is to live your life as a mensch, to be a decent human being, to be able to integrate into your life and to portray to others around you what it means to be a person upon whom or for whom Torah has actually rubbed off on you. And you are the epitome of what a decent human being and a decent Jew actually should be. And so we actually preface the whole thing by saying, we've got to remember, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. We're not here talking about questioning whether you are Jewish or you're not Jewish. We're not here questioning about whether you will attain Gan Eden or you won't attain Gan Eden. We're talking about characteristics and character traits that are going to take you above and beyond anything that all the law in the world could actually prescribe for you. And what are we referring to when we refer to Yisrael? Yisrael is a big word. It is a big word, Yisrael. We've got used to it as being the name of our holy land. We've got used to it being a euphemism for a Jew. But Yisrael, we are told, can be broken up and should be broken up into the words that it represents, which is Yesh shishim ribu otiyot la Torah, which means there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. What does that mean? The same way as every letter is significant and important for the Torah, so is every single Jew of paramount importance for the whole of the Jewish people. We're not overlooking anybody when it comes to this study. That's the word Yisrael. Kol Yisrael. It makes no difference whether you are a studious person or you're an ignoramus. It makes no difference whether you are a king or you're a peasant. It makes no difference whether you are a man or a woman. It makes no difference whether you are old or you're young. Kol Yisrael. Every single Jew counts exactly the same way when it comes to these axioms, when it comes to these major principles, and when it comes to our participation, our part in Olam Haba. And perhaps we need to pause there for a moment and think about, what is Olam Haba? What are we talking about when we say all of Israel, every Jew has a chelek, has a portion in Olam Haba? By the way, it doesn't say that everybody has exactly the same size portion in Olam Haba. It tells us that you have a portion. We have a part. We have something, a part to play in Olam Haba. What is Olam Haba? Now, you and I might think, and rightly so, that Olam Haba is the place that we go to when we leave this world. Olam Haba, the world to come, is that place after death that some refer to as heaven, that some refer to as Gan Eden, that some refer to as the afterlife. I'm not sure if that's what our sages had in mind when they put these words in here, Olam Haba. Olam Haba is not necessarily the afterlife. It is not necessarily Gan Eden. Perhaps if Torah wanted to say Gan Eden here, they would have said Gan Eden. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek beGan Eden. The whole Jewish people has a part, a portion in Gan Eden. No, that's not what it says. It says Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek leolam haba. Everybody has a part in the world to come. What is the world to come? The world to come, according to Hasidic teaching, is the time when Mashiach will come. Everybody has a part in the world to come. That part in the world to come is the significant part that every single Jew has. And how do we have it? Now, it's not necessarily something that you and I have earned. We're talking here about the value of a Jewish soul, the value of an individual. Everybody has a portion, has a part in the world to come, in the advent of Mashiach, and everybody has a part in that life, in this world that will be dominated by peace on earth and love and all the wonderful things that we strive for when Mashiach will come. No pandemics and no illnesses and no difficulties and no problems and no issues, but just a kind of what we would refer to a utopian existence, which we would have in this world. Everybody, every Jew has that. And how do we have that? So perhaps that's the suggestion now that this verse goes on to tell us. Shenemar, va'amech kulam tzadikim. God is telling us, in my eyes, as your father, my people are all righteous. Everyone is righteous. You know, they always joke about, we always talk about the fact that acharei mot kadoshim emor, that we, after a person dies, we always say how righteous the person was. I've never heard a eulogy where people say how terrible that individual was, God forbid. We don't do that. We always talk about good things. We try and find some redeeming factor. We try and make sure that there is something that we can say that's kind, that's nice about this particular individual. And it's not just being politically correct. That's not just trying to pander to the family or make, because that's the truth. The truth is, there is a huge value even in one mitzvah that a person does. But the verse is saying, V'amech kulam tzadikim. Your people are all righteous. Now, you and I know that on the face of it, that's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily true. We know some people who are not so righteous. We know some people who pretend to be righteous. We know some people who fake it. We know some people who certainly in our minds would be classified as righteous, but would I call them a tzaddik? Would I say a righteous person? If we're going to take the definition of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, where he talks about tzaddikim, where he talks about the real righteous people who are born that way, who are, it's something much, much further and much, much more powerful and much, much deeper than just us saying, righteous man, good Jew, nice person. That's not what it's about. Are we referring to that kind of tzaddikim here? Here, v'amech kulam tzaddikim, I think Torah is saying we've got to know that everybody has righteousness. There is something righteous. There is something good within everybody. And what is that ultimate good that everybody has? Le'olam yirshu aretz neitzer mata'ai. God says, just the fact that I created that individual, that in itself is powerful. Just the fact that I made you, that is a power of which you can be proud. That makes you have a righteousness within you. You've got a beautiful soul. You've got a beautiful neshama. You've got the power of God within you. That is what this verse is perhaps referring to. Hashem is telling us here that we are coming to study ethics. We are coming to study moral values. We are coming to study the way of how to be a mensch. Just know before we start that every one of you, every one of us is capable of that. You've got the fertile soil within you. You've got the neshama, the soul, that carries within it the ability to not only be the kind of person that God wanted you to be, but you can be the kind of person that you want to be. You have within you the power to make your life so full and so productive and so wonderful. And you have within you, each and every one of us, by our inheritance, we are made with the essence of righteousness. We're made with that essence of goodness. We've got that within ourselves. It is our job to exploit that. It's our job to explore that. And yes, a tremendous amount of time spent in study, in prayer, in learning Torah, in doing mitzvahs, in doing all of those things can take us to great and wonderful and fantastic heights. But nothing is going to really make this diamond glow. Nothing is going to really make it as glossy, as special, as powerful, as brilliant as it would be and as it will be when we learn Pirkei Avos. When we get down to the real morality, the real ethics, the real values by which we need to live our lives. And there's never been a more important time to learn Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, than right now. We're at a time where the world has been literally thrown upside down, a time of great confusion for many people, time where nothing seems to add up, nothing seems to make that much sense. Yeah, we know there's a pandemic. We know that there are vaccines that are supposed to arrive. We know that there is, but everything is confusing. Then we're not sure whether the vaccines are going to work. Then we're not sure if it's going to be this strain that it will cover. And there are so many things that have thrown everything into confusion. And then we go a little deeper. We start questioning, are we really doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing by not going to shul? Should we be doing the right thing by going to shul? Should we try? We've got so many confusing issues, and people haven't learned yet how to deal with it all. We don't know. But we have within our Torah the values by which we know that we could live our lives. We have the values in Pirkei Avos, ethics by which we can have the real valuable tools that will take us not just to where we should be as Jews, but way beyond that. Pirkei Avos is about actually going above and beyond what the Torah really created you for and made you for. Hashem says, listen, we're going to start off, Torah says we're going to start off by telling you you're all righteous. Yes, we know that. You've all got a part of God within you. We know that too. You all have the values within you. We know that too. But this is about bringing them out. This is about exploiting them a little bit. This is about enumerating them, looking at them, putting them under the magnifying glass, making them part of your daily practice and your daily regimen. This is about taking these ethics and making them part of your lives. These are the tools that we are hopefully going to be able to acquire through the study of these shiurim on Pirkei Avos. Now, right away, when we get to chapter 1, and we'll just do the first line of it, or the first couple of words of it, and that is that it says right in the beginning of chapter 1, if you look there, Perek Rishon, first chapter, verse 1, part 1, section 1, it says, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. And right away, once again, we have some confusion. Because if you ask anybody, so go to a child in grade 1 or pre-grade and ask them, who did Moshe receive the Torah from? Where did this Torah come from? Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Did Moses receive the Torah from Sinai? No, I think not. Moshe kibel Torah meHashem. God gave us the Torah. Moses received the Torah from God. What does it mean, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai? So let's think about it. What is Sinai? What are we talking about when we talk about Sinai? And perhaps if we want to understand Sinai, we also need to understand the person called Moshe. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Interestingly enough, it doesn't say the Jewish people received the Torah at Sinai. It says Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. We're studying a principle here. This is not just a historical outline of how the Torah was handed down from generation to generation. It's not just giving us a fact that we all know already, that Moses received the Torah on our behalf at Mount Sinai. We're trying to make an axiomatic statement and a principle. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. Well, what was Sinai? Sinai, we know, is a mountain. Do you know where Sinai is? Torah says you don't. Torah says nobody knows where Sinai is. And even in the days when Sinai was part of Israel and they used to take tours there and they would say, this is Mount Sinai, it's guesswork. Because part of the definition of Sinai is that it's unknown. Part of the definition of Sinai is it was the humblest of all the mountains. When God wanted to give the Torah, the Midrash says, the high mountains came and said, Everest would have come along and said, give the mountain on me, I'm the tallest mountain. And then the most beautiful mountain would have come along and said, I'm the most beautiful, beautiful mountain in the middle of Europe. Come give the Torah on me. And the mountains were clamoring for this fame and fortune. Sinai was unknown, insignificant, small. The most humble mountain is Mount Sinai. And think about it, that's what it says about Moshe. Moshe, the most humble man. The most humble man, Torah says, that ever lived. We often confuse humbleness, humility, with being downtrodden, with being somebody else's shmata, a doormat. That's not what humbleness is. Humility is not that at all. Moses, the man that represented humility, receives the Torah from Sinai, which represents humility. What is this verse talking about? Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai is teaching us principle number one of how to be a mensch: humility. And again, humility is not a negative trait. Humility is the most powerful positive trait that a person could possibly ever think of and pick up. Humility means not thinking about oneself all the time and only. Humility means having an agenda of incorporating other people. Humility means realizing, as Moshe did, and recognizing that had Hashem picked somebody else, they possibly would have done a better job. Humility is the acclaim or the accolade or the statement that I myself have got gifts, and I myself have got the obligation to use those gifts, to use those talents, to use that wherewithal to the best of my ability. I know that somebody else may have done a better job or could do a better job, or maybe is doing a better job right now. I know that. But humility is the ability to say, I am going to do my best, and my mission statement is about others, and it's not about me, and I don't want to have, and I'm not going to have an ounce of ego coming into anything that I do. It's not about what people are going to say about me. It's about me being able to do for others and get that message across and make sure that other people have the success that they need and that they deserve. Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai is principle number one. We need, before we can be a mensch, and in fact, before we can get to any other detail about Torah, we need to have humility. We need to be humble. And hopefully we can take this message of humility, of humbleness, that we've learned from Moshe, and we've learned it from Sinai, and integrate that into this beautiful, beautiful diamond that we have, that we are righteous. There's an essence of goodness, of righteousness within us. And first principle, humility, humbleness, is the way that we're going to start to be able to embroider upon and unlock the beautiful, deep, and profound and wonderful messages that we ourselves have contained within ourselves. Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, the ethics of these major principles. I look forward to sharing more thoughts with you next week, same time, same place, and I look forward to having you participate and join me. It's been wonderful to have you today. Nice getting to see the people who have joined. We hope that you've learned something, that you've enjoyed this, and we look forward to being back with you again next week, same time, same place. Acquiring tools for life, Pirkei Avos. Thank you for being here today, and have a wonderful week.